I'm a product and go-to-market software executive. I've been working at startups for a very long time, about 20 years, as well as innovation teams within larger companies. Over the past 15 years, I've been primarily focused on enterprise software. And that journey has given me the opportunity to dive into many different industries. So I've worked with utilities, with colleges and universities, with banks most recently. And what I realized as I embarked on this journey of supporting my aging parents is that many of the skills that I had acquired in startups were transferable to what I was helping my parents navigate through. So, like trying to identify and solve the most important problems. You can get hit with so many different issues along the way. Figuring out what the right team looks like to support your parents. It may not be you. You may need to bring in caregivers. I've had experience diving into industries I knew nothing about. I know a lot more about caregiving and senior living communities now than I've ever known or thought I would know. And figuring out like when things suddenly get chaotic and something unexpected happens, how to try to navigate that with sort of calm and focus and patience. So with that, one of the reasons I have a few goals for this talk. One is I really want to normalize the conversation. I feel like in work environments, we talk a lot about, people, new parents and paternity leave and maternity leave. Not a lot of people talk about providing support for people who have an aging loved one or are caregiving for a loved one at any age for that matter. So trying to normalize the conversation in the hope that people will support each other and share tips a little bit more. My second goal is I want to share some of the lessons that I learned the hard way. Hopefully, you can take at least something away from this talk. And the third is that you're not alone, right? People experience this at different stages. People are so busy in their lives and often don't have time for these conversations. But everyone goes through it at some point, right? Either for themselves or for someone else. I do want to throw out a little disclaimer. I am not a healthcare professional. I'm not a legal professional, and I'm not a financial professional. Okay. I am sharing many, many different tips that I hope are useful to you because I learned them while navigating them with my parents over many years. And I'm hopeful that some of them are helpful and useful. Okay. So a little bit about my story and how I got here. COVID was a big wake up call for many, many different families, right? We saw a lot of people pass away, unfortunately, oftentimes without family nearby, because family members couldn't even be in hospital rooms sometimes. And I saw my parents age quite a bit during this time. And that was a huge wake up call for me. I suddenly realized, wow, what if something suddenly happened? I would have no idea what like their financial situation was, their legal situation. I wouldn't know their wishes. Like there's so much I didn't know. And I hadn't started what I'm calling the conversation. And so that really kind of got me into action. I started creating all sorts of spreadsheets. I started doing research. I created binders on like what documents do you have in place, need to have in place, and what do you need to know? What conversations do you need to have? And I started to take my parents through these binders, and they kind of sat on a shelf for a while. And then it was when their health started to decline in many different ways. And it was over a long period of time, but we experienced so many different things: cancer, dementia, wounds, which are a whole category of health issues, declining vision, mobility changes. At a certain point, it became very clear that they couldn't stay in their home. They had a four-story walk-up, which was gorgeous. They'd poured, so much love into it, but it was not what is often referred to as an age-in-place home. It was very hard to retrofit and kind of impossible to have a wheelchair, any kind of wheelchair accessibility. So that really got me into action mode. My parents didn't really have a plan. The plan was to stay in the house. And my thinking was, well, if you stay in this house, your life may not last as long as if you move. And so I started talking to consultants, experts. I quickly realized I put a sort of timeline in place for myself as to like when would we need to move them by? What would be available? What are the scenarios that we need to plan for? I'm clearly a planner, right? I toured 12 different communities. I quickly figured out what questions do you ask? What does good look like? What does not good look like? Uh, I formed relationships with their doctors because I realized that they often did not self-report very accurately. And oftentimes they forgot to follow up on what the doctor said to do next, whether it was to get a scan or to come back in 2 months or see a specialist. It's just their memory wasn't there or they were focused on other things. And so we were sort of in a position where we really needed to dive in. And throughout all of this, I ended up managing my parents through a lot of big transitions. Everything from moving them from their house of 40 years, emptying it and selling it, to helping them identify a good independent living, senior living community to move into, and eventually moving them to assisted and memory care. So I will say and highly recommend to talk to consultants and people who are experts in the field in your geographic location. They really know so much and can add so much value. Okay, that said, every family has a different story, right? That's my story. But I have so many friends who are going through this in various forms. I have friends who have older spouses who are 20 years older and are going through some various stages of illness or just real physical change, and they have to plan for that and figure out how to care for them. I have other friends who have a very able parent and then another parent who is declining very rapidly. And their idea of what success looks like and what solutions they would be attracted to are very different. So every family has a story and every family is different, whether that is, at what speed each parent is aging or what the structure of the family looks like. One thing you really have to every family has to take into consideration is who are the stakeholders in the family, right? Who are the people who are going to step up and help, and who are the people who want to provide input but don't really want to be involved, right? Everyone's different. And the geographic location of those family members may be different. And that's yet another challenge. I helped my parents from afar for many years, and I visited every month. So you have to figure out what works for you and how to make it work. And then, of course, quality of health and finances are a huge factor. That said, I find that some things are universal, right? At the end of the day, we are not here forever. And we have an opportunity to be really intentional about both how we spend our time with our loved ones and how they want to spend their remaining years. That said, letting go of independence is really hard, right? My parents felt and continue to feel very young, even though they're not. They're very young in spirit, very autonomous creatures who like to, very much live their life fully and independently. And yet, as your body starts to decline and or your mind does, it's really, really challenging and they need support. That said, stepping into the role of caregiver can be incredibly hard, not just as a child, but also as a spouse, right? Or a friend or a neighbor, whatever it is. I find at the end of the day that fear of the unknown, i.e., not having a plan, is even harder. And that has really motivated me to share my learning and put together this, what I'm calling the Aging Parent Playbook. So I'm about to go into that. I'm just checking in. I see some people have introduced themselves on the chat. If you've recently joined and haven't, if you could introduce yourself, just name where you're calling from and why you decided to join, that would be great. Okay. So the components of the Aging Parent Playbook are as follows. One, the first step is just start the conversation. Start talking to them about it, right? A lot of people don't want to talk about the last few years of their life. They might be in their 60s and not think that's happening for a very long time. Maybe they're in their 70s, whatever the age is, right? Health kind of determines when oftentimes is the right time. And yet, sometimes you need clarity before that on some key things. It is helpful to discuss scenarios. Think about bringing in the experts. Explore different living options. Is someone going to come live with you, right? Sometimes family members live with family members. Is that sustainable? Is it possible, right? Ask about finances. We're going to make sure that the legal documents are in order. I'll talk about what a health packet is and how important it is to create one. Take inventory of property, go through family possessions together before it's too late, right? And too late maybe there's a lot of mental, like health and mental decline that makes it too difficult to both share those stories, much less capture them. So it's not necessarily that they've passed early or something like that. And then I'm going to talk about a lot about being patient and taking breaks and to check in emotionally with yourself, with the stakeholders, and with your loved ones who are aging, because this process forces everyone involved to go through a lot of transitions, and it's not easy. Okay, so how does starting the conversation, what might that look like, right? You'll have to figure it out for your family, right? What is the best way to start it? For me, it was sort of like, well, if you could design the last 5, 10, 15 years of your life, what would that look like? What would success look like? Like, what would make you happy, right? What terrifies you? Oftentimes, as kids, we are not tuned into what scares our parents unless they're, sharing that willingly. We may not have had that conversation. And what haven't they done that they still want to do? And then the last question is, how would they like their life to be celebrated and honored? Right? Sounds really morbid. I know a lot of this might seem really morbid, but this is the thing. You'd rather know how they feel about that. And that could be everything to, do you want us to have a party when you pass? To, do you know if you want to be buried, cremated, or ashes spread all over? Whatever it is, right? My parents' case, it was very much like, have a party. Let's not make this morbid. So everybody has a different feel and an idea of what they want, or they may not have thought about it and don't want to think about it at all. You'll have to figure out how best to navigate that. Having a sense, though, I think just makes everything a little bit easier. So getting started, kind of like a business, it's like, what's your North Star? What are you shooting for? What does success look like? And success, when you ask that question, it's what does success look like for your loved ones? And that may or may not be aligned with what you can support, right? Parents, there are some parents who might say, I just am going to come live with you. And in some cultures and for some people, that may be fine. And that's everything like exactly what they planned the whole time. And for others, they may not feel like they have the bandwidth, much less the physical space or the emotional bandwidth to support that. So getting clarity on that early is helpful. Just that by itself. As you navigate these conversations, recognize that, you really need to lead with empathy. That goes kind of without saying. I recognize that. But be patient both with them and with your own feelings as you navigate that conversation. Because again, there are many stakeholders and everybody's got an opinion. But at the end of the day, it's, your parents or whoever you're caring for. It might be a grandmother, it might be an older spouse, who is needing to make some decisions about what a joyful end of life would look like. So identify stakeholders. I said that, research and discuss options. Yeah, like as you're, defining success, you're going to start coming up with scenarios and figuring out how to make a plan around that. Talking to experts will help you do that. If you're considering senior living communities, which is very much of a US centric solution, so if you're calling from other countries, which I see some people are, it may not be the same. But regardless, there are probably a few different types of options that you know of. And I would talk to as many people as you can to figure out really what the quality of life is in each of those options. Hold on a second. Okay. So what do living options look like? In the United States, these tend to be the living options that people consider, right? You can age in place, stay where you are, retrofit the house to be as age in place possible as possible, which means often sometimes changing the width of doors to allow a wheelchair to go through, maybe renovating the bathroom to have a wheelchair accessible shower, putting in bars next to toilets, next to showers, next to kitchen, all sorts of places. Certainly, if there's any stairwells, next to stairwells. Um, and if possible, hopefully, if it's a ground level house or apartment, making sure there are ramps in place. That is not always possible. That wasn't possible for us, for sure. But oftentimes people want to stay where they are. So that's usually the first thing you explore. Moving in with family is another common one. Then you get into senior living communities. And within senior living communities, you have a few different options. You have independent living, which means your loved ones can basically take care of themselves. They are able to do what is often referred to as the activities of daily living. That means they can shower themselves, they can bathe themselves, they can feed themselves, they can maybe cook, maybe they do their own laundry, things like that. Then you have assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. Assisted living means they need help with some of those things. Memory care means that's often where people with dementia or some kind of cognitive impairment may go. Uh, those places are not ideal. I will be very honest with that. I've visited, toured many. There are there's a lot of questions to ask and a lot of due diligence to do before considering those. And then there are places like skilled nursing. So if somebody has a hospital, goes to a hospital, has a fall, something like that, oftentimes they go to skilled nursing afterwards, then rehab, and maybe back to independent or assisted. One of the things I encourage everybody to do is if your loved ones have not downsized yet or even sorted through things yet, I highly encourage them to do so because that's a whole process by itself. And as you go through things, there is a story in everything that you find. And if you wait till it's kind of too late to do that, you miss out on that opportunity. One thing that came up time and time again is whether or not your loved ones have long-term care insurance. My parents did not. It is usually a pretty expensive insurance up front, but it really helps cover a lot of costs of senior living communities in the US later. I'm going to go through several tactical things and more. Before I do, I'm just going to pause. Any questions so far? All good? Okay. I'm going to keep going. So these may seem obvious, but a lot of people don't do them. So you need to come up to speed on their finances, on, what property do they own? Sometimes you discover they own something you didn't realize and didn't know about, right? Family history, heirlooms. I was emptying my parents' attic and I found things I had never seen before, and they had kind of forgotten what they were. So it is helpful to go through some of this stuff a little earlier, especially while, they're a little bit more with it and they can share some of those stories. When it comes to financial, really important to have someone they trust, have a clear understanding of what bank accounts do they have, investments, 401ks, IRAs, debts, bills, subscriptions, life insurance. Are there any pensions involved? Online accounts is a whole nother category, but just getting the lay of the land financially. Some families talk about this stuff all the time. Other families never talk about it. So it just depending on what your situation is, I encourage you to start that conversation. It also helps you know how much they can support themselves later in life and how much assistance they might need. One, there are a few really important things from a legal perspective. Again, very US centric. But if you haven't heard about it, power of attorney, this allows someone they trust to make financial and medical decisions on their behalf, should they suddenly be unable to. If you don't have this in place, it makes it very hard. So I highly recommend you talk to your loved ones about doing that as soon as possible. Advanced medical directives, that is a form that allows your loved one to express their medical wishes should they be in a situation where they can't make medical decisions on their own behalf. Most doctors and lawyers will automatically ask you to do that if you have a solid primary care physicians. They will ask if they have that in place. But not everybody does. And you don't want something terrible to happen and not have one in place and not know what their wishes were. So have that conversation, make sure you get that in place. It goes without saying, usually people start with a will. Maybe they have a draft of it, maybe they've never finished it, maybe they have really thoughtfully thought through every single detail of the will and the estate plan at some point, but haven't even, maybe renewed it or revised it recently. So it's good just to get an idea of where they are with all of these things. Uh, Trusts, often things are put into trust. There are tax advantages around that. So talk to your lawyers about that. One thing that I had not really zeroed in on or thought about until the lawyer mentioned it is beneficiaries. It's kind of obvious, right? When you have a bank account or an investment account, there's always a beneficiary allocation. A lot of people put off actually just assigning a beneficiary. And when they do, it's usually a name that they put. The thing is, if your loved ones have a will or an estate plan and that has any kind of trust in it, usually you want the beneficiary designation to be in the name of the trust. So there's a lot of sort of due diligence to do there, and that will potentially save you a lot of time later. The other thing that is incredibly helpful, and there's no reason to not do this now, in my opinion, is to get a copy of their health insurance cards, be really clear on what their allergies are. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, right? But it's so useful. If something suddenly happened and you had to rush someone to the hospital, the people at the hospital need all of this information immediately. So putting a packet together is really useful. A copy of the advanced medical directive, and if you can, a list of doctors. And this is something we ended up having on the back of their door of their apartment in independent living. And again, an assisted. Many of those places require it, so it's kind of a forcing function. But it also allowed us to create digital copies and have them on hand if needed. Okay, pause. Plus list of current medications. Absolutely, Anu, you're so right. I do that and I miss that. I'm so glad you shared that. And yes, and Joe, Social Security benefits for sure. Yeah, and in the US, you have Medicare and Medicaid, and often people have two insurances. So there's a primary and secondary. My parents did have that. And, it's funny. You're like, oh, they have their insurance. Well, like my father had his insurance card in his wallet, and they were so worn down we could barely like read the numbers. And so it's useful to have these things. Um, Medicare cover long-term care. Medicare covers a lot of day-to-day elderly care, including sort of in-home services, not long-term care. However, memory care is its own category that does come with tax deductions. If that's useful. Yes, happy to share the presentation. And again, Anu is so right on this last slide. List of medications as part of this health packet is critical. So thank you for calling that out. You don't want your loved one to go to the ER and then to give them a medication that, doesn't work well with one they're already taking. All right, the next thing is, depending on what their health situation is today and or might be into the future, as you think about living scenarios, it's also useful to start to think about a care plan. Just to consider what kind of care they might need. Assuming their health eventually, even if it's 10 years down the line, may decline, who's going to be caring for them? Are they living alone? Do they have a loved one? Is their spouse someone who would care for them and is able to physically care for them? I will also say sometimes people just aren't wired to be great caregivers, and that's okay, right? Oftentimes spouses are put in the position of caring for their spouse and that loved one, and it makes a lot of sense, right? But they're not necessarily the best suited to it, depending on what your loved one's going through. So plan for different scenarios, develop solutions that don't only work for your parent, but all of the stakeholders who are the supporting stakeholders who are involved. And hire help, right? Being 100% caregiver is really hard. I definitely saw my father do it for a while, and I think it wore him down. And so bringing in help early, even like a few hours a day, is really the best. And in my experience, you find those highly experienced professionals who know how to navigate, your parent's specific illness. The best ones come through referrals. I already mentioned the health packet, and long-term care insurance can become an asset later on. So one of the things, every family navigates this. If you can get clarity on roles and responsibilities early, it may help, right? Just like companies, there are many stakeholders in families. There's politics often. Some people have different skill sets and are better at some things more than others. There are often, especially as your loved one starts to age and really needs more and more, increasingly more help, there are many categories in many areas in which you may need to step up and help. And figuring out who should be on, first base, second base, and third base, and being really clear about that up front can help. So I'm a big fan of, divide and conquer versus have everybody work on the same thing. It doesn't work so well, right? So that goes everything from handling the legal stuff, the financial stuff, the medical stuff, to real estate, selling the house, cleaning out the house, handling the moves, helping the parents emotionally process all of the changes, hiring and managing the caregivers if you have any, and just the weekly stuff, right? Groceries, transportation to medical appointments, especially if you're not living locally, right? And this is the kind of stuff that sometimes just isn't noticed, even cleaning, right? And the parents are like, we got that covered, we got that covered. And then you visit and you realize, wow, they really don't have that covered. We really need to come up with a system or a process. So I think one of the hardest things to process as you're supporting your aging parents, specifically in the parent situation, is that you're going through like a series of transitions, right? You had a child to parent relationship. At some point, you have more of an adult to adult or parent to parent relationship if you have your own kids. And then during this process, as they're aging and needing to lean more on you, you really find yourself at a tipping point where you are transitioning to making all the decisions and taking a more parental role. And I wanted to call this out because it's not only a transition for you, it's also a transition for your parent. If anybody has kids out there, it's hard to imagine having your kids take care of you. It's like something we say, but to give up, so many of the things that you do day to day and just trust them with all of it, it's really hard, right? So it's good to be aware of that transition and both give yourself and them some time to move through it.
Hi, Elena. This is
Yeah.
Kim.
Oh, hi.
So we seem to have a question from Anu.
Okay.
Anu, do you mind asking your question and getting on audio?
Yeah, not at all. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my question. So,
Absolutely.
uh, you know, when you have multiple family members, stepping into that caregiver role, everyone, what a great suggestion to divide and conquer. Um, what do you recommend when you observe people not living up to their end of the bargain? It's already sort of a stressful situation, and
Yeah.
what strategies do you have to have that difficult conversation on top of what's already, stressful?
Oh, so I don't have a crystal ball. And I probably don't have the perfect answer, but I'll share some thoughts on that. I think sometimes we divide and conquer. We kind of create lists of you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And for what's happening at the same time as you're supporting your parents is like the stakeholders are going through their own evolutions and different experiences in their own life, which can introduce new stress. So maybe they thought they had it covered, but they didn't really have it covered and they got absorbed into something else. Or maybe they didn't really officially sign up for it, or they did, but they're really not well suited to it. or they're not going to reliably deliver. And you have to make a call, right? I think you can have the hard conversation. That's always a good sort of managerial approach of that, give the feedback and say, you said you were going to do this. Why didn't you do this? Help me understand. And if you're getting kind of a toxic reaction to that versus, you know, I appreciate that, I'll do better next time, you may have someone who's not going to deliver on those things. That's what makes families, families can be very complicated that way. It's not like leading a team where people are getting paid to do their job and be held accountable, right? It's different. Uh, so I think you've got to figure out, depending on your situation, how best to approach that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sorry, there's no perfect silver bullet to that one.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. I see a couple other
Yep.
questions here.
Chinar, did you want to come on audio and also ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Elena. This is a
Yeah.
fantastic presentation, and it's some of the things are wake up calls, and some of the things you know it, and it's good
Yeah.
to hear that everyone's going through that, and how do we navigate the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the things that becomes very hard for us sometimes is navigating different opinions between parents. Right? Father wants something, mother wants something else, you want something else.
Yeah.
Also, you know what is more practical.
Yeah.
You are doing the research, you are seeing how things are evolving, what things are in place.
Yeah.
Versus parents, they're more idealistic, they think they're perfectly fine, right? As you said
Totally.
earlier, they may not think that physically they are having those challenges, mentally
Yeah.
because they are very sharp and they think they can do all those things.
Yeah.
For simple things like driving, right? They think they can do it, but we know that they shouldn't be doing it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
So, how do you navigate some of these conversations and how do you convince them?
Yeah. So I have a couple tips on that one. One, at least in the case of my parents, it took, again, I lived abroad and on an opposite coast. And I realized just like influencing, leadership in a company, you needed a lot of touch points. So I would visit them every few weeks and start the conversation and continue to express my concerns. And it slowly kind of sunk in. It didn't change their mind. Eventually, what I ended up doing is I brought in a consultant. She calls herself kind of an aging consultant, and she manages tons of caregivers and things to just talk to them, to meet them and talk to them. So I brought in a third party, and that actually helped a lot because she is an expert in the field, and she's the one who said, "You know what? I really don't think this is an age and place home. Tell me what's important to you. What would your criteria be if you moved? Help me understand what you want." Right? And it was sort of like a peer on peer conversation. Sometimes I think when it comes from the kid, it's really hard, right? Because
Yeah.
there's like they don't really trust you sometimes, like they want to, but it's like, do you have an angle, like, do you really have their best interests in mind? And so it was really helpful. And she was coming in to just initially like look at the place, and she very quickly looked at the place, looked at my parents, and went straight to the conversation of senior living communities because it was so obvious. And she said, let's make sure we find a really great place. I know of an amazing place. I think it hits all your criteria. Let's make sure it does, right? So it put them kind of in the driver's seat, but it guided them with somebody who's considered an expert. That really
That's
helped.
helpful. Yeah, that's helpful because third person coming in expert is they always count it more valuable. Like kids
Yeah.
sometimes are taken as for granted, right?
Yeah.
And the mental shift of okay, suddenly the kids have become parent. We think like that, but they may not.
Totally. Totally. And there is a point, it depends on where your parents are in their physical mental decline, where I realized I just needed to step in, like in a bigger way. And
Yeah.
I just needed to start making decisions. And I did a lot in the background. So they weren't ready, but I put them on wait lists 2 to 3 years before I finally moved them to assisted and memory care. I did all of the visits way in advance because some of the best places have 2 year wait lists. So if you
Yeah.
don't plan, especially in the US, you're not going to get a spot. So they weren't even there to process the idea, right? But I had to kind of just go ahead and make some plans, not move them right away, but I had to think ahead.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it's depends. We have to be strong as kids. We have
Yeah.
to take those hard decisions for them. I try to give more choice, more respect to their choices,
Yeah.
which I feel down the line it's going to be detrimental because they're not going to be able to take those decisions, and it's ultimately going to fall on us.
Exactly. It's going to fall on your plate. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I was very aware of that from a young age, to be honest. I've known that for a while. Like if I don't do it, it's just not going to get done, kind of. Or if I don't think through like and help them guide them through these decisions, we're going to end up kind of with a mess to deal with and not a great overall experience for anyone. So it's really helpful. I see some more things coming through. I'm going to, yeah, dynamic shifting parents to parents. Absolutely. Yeah. Parental responsibilities is just as important as what you take on. Yeah, with empathy and patience. I mean, there are so many times where I had the conversation, and especially if you're coming off a really busy job, a long day, and then you're coming to have them, and you have like 30 minutes to have a conversation or an hour, and I just wanted to get my binder out and go through. That did not work. I needed to go and have an hour conversation, sit for 3 hours here, and just let it evolve. It can be really hard. So it depends on your parents. Okay, I'm going to go through a few more slides and then open it up to more questions. So the other thing I really want to highlight is that stepping into the role of caregiver can be hard, not just for you, but also for spouses, right? Often the default caregiver is first the spouse, and it may go unnoticed. You may not even realize how much they are carrying. And I've seen this with friends and their parents, not all spouses are well suited to the job. And that's not a bad thing. We're just not all wired to be the best caregivers. And that can be honestly bad for their relationship. It's not great for the person who's the caregiver. The person who's on the receiving end feels maybe not getting the best care and feels kind of bad that, that person's in that position. So if you can afford to bring in some help, even just to relieve that spouse, it will be a better outcome for everybody. So you really want to check in, look for burnout, schedule in relief, find some help, and check in with both parties frequently, especially if, in my case, my mother has Alzheimer's. If you have something like that, it changes the person's personality. It can be really tough. You got to go through many transitions, and you need to make sure they're both okay and maybe guide them through making some changes so that both are okay. Okay, sorry, one second. All right. And, take time for yourself. I definitely wouldn't have gotten through all of this without making sure I identified people and had my own circle of friends. Thankfully, I had great group of childhood friends who happened to still live near my parents. They showed up so many times, just even with a meal, right? Had moved my parents and then had to prep their house for sale. I didn't live locally. I had a friend who would like take in the mail, take out the trash cans, keep an eye on things. There was a storm, the wires went down. He like helped me fix that. So like you kind of need a village to help you through it as well. And sometimes it's just having people show up, right? And if you know of others who are going through this, keep that in mind, right? Just check in on them from time to time. Because it is hard to go through these transitions, both role reversal and emotional and everything. If you are, or your parent, or like one of your parents, is in the role of caregiver, it's really easy to get completely consumed by it. So you need to establish boundaries. And you may need to establish boundaries with the other stakeholders who are also in supporting roles. Again, there's a long laundry list of things to take over and to organize and manage. So you want to make sure it's manageable for you and that you can still live your life joyfully and, go through everything and enjoy your life. Yeah, right, Maura. Plus one to the point about spouses not always being the best caregivers. Yeah, and it's a slippery slope. You kind of start, you don't realize you're doing it, and then you keep doing it. So because I've had this ex personal experience with dementia and Alzheimer's, I did just want to quickly touch on this. I was really amazed by the statistics that 75% of all dementia cases go undiagnosed globally. That's pretty incredible. I have heard, I have friends who are like, "Oh yeah, my parents sometimes forgets things and sometimes they're irritable, but they say they don't have dementia." Well, just it helps to get, if you're at all suspecting that, it helps to see a neurologist and get some early scans and diagnoses. And the reason why I think it's important is because if they're going through that and you don't know about it or aren't sure, you may not be supporting them in the best way. And it's easy to get short-tempered and annoyed at a way that they're behaving or reacting. And if you knew that, you may approach it slightly differently. There are also a few drugs, both to help with temperament and to slightly slow the decline. There is no cure. Uh, but I just wanted to flag that because it is a very difficult disease and people's personalities can completely change. It is very difficult for the spouses involved, and oftentimes allowing those spouses to get some space becomes necessary and maybe the best path. Okay, I'm going to pause. That is the majority. I have a couple more slides. But if anybody has any questions or wants to come off mute and ask anything, please do. I see, Michael, your question about consultants. It is very specific to location because, well, let me say it this way. There's general aging. The consultants we spoke to often were sort of experts in this geographic location, but they were also experts in just assisted living in general. So they gave us a lot of tips on like what to look for, ratios, retention, where things go south, right? What questions to ask when we go and visit and evaluate an institution. Uh, so that was very helpful. The person I worked with was local. She'd been working for 30 years. There are websites where you can, aging sort of parent type of websites. Maybe I'll share some later, where you might be able to find some resources and some people through those. But a lot of this stuff is very localized. Uh, yes, I do think the diagnosis is really important, Maura. When did I start noticing changes? Is from Anu. And was there a moment that made you pause? Yes, definitely. So, one, my father's eyesight really began to decline. I didn't even realize how much. I didn't actually even realize it till much later because he'd just been so stoic about it. But basically, he completely had lost eyesight in one eye, and we didn't entirely know. And again, four-story walk-up of a house, right? Three floors, all sorts of lots of challenges. He also had a knee challenge and stuff, and he was okay. Otherwise, he was pretty okay. But we would visit, and we started to notice my mother forgetting a lot of things. That's one thing. But she started to become increasingly kind of anxious about stuff that didn't seem like she would normally be anxious about, like where's my purse and losing the purse and then going up and down three to four different flights of stairs and losing it multiple times a day and thinking somebody had stolen something. That is a very common trait of dementia. She also had developed a wound on her leg, and it was very clear that she had no idea how to treat it. She was just putting like lotion on it, and it was getting bigger. And that is not how she would have normally behaved. So there were some signs that made it very clear that we really needed to step in. Hopefully that's helpful. And I would say the other thing is our father started to ask for help more. He started to express an interest in developing a plan to move somewhere. And normally he would not have done that. shorter attention span, increased ADD. Yes, that is also a sign of dementia. Um, you're welcome, Anu. Uh, that is definitely like my mom. So dementia, people with dementia or Alzheimer's, they have a really hard time going through a series of steps. So my mother used to love to cook, but finishing a cooking project would be really difficult. Like making cookies in 30 minutes suddenly became like a 3 hour ordeal. Really hard because they can't stay on task. Became really hard. Um, yeah, and then just changes in mood, more swings in mood, kind of lashing out and weird about weird things, in not so nice ways. I've heard some people suddenly become we're not great, really nice people, and suddenly become really nice people. So, it's hard. The thing about dementia is it affects everyone differently, different speeds, everything. In my case, my mother also had aphasia. And so for her, it was harder to recall words and remember. And she used to have a killer memory, insane recall. So that was a big change for her. Okay, so these two slides are really just refresher. Start the conversation. Make sure you've got that POA and AMD in place. It's very legal, very tactical, but it will save you time later on. You're welcome, Joe. Sure, Eric. Uh, Housing options, think through that, create that health packet. Then you, at least if there's an emergency that happens, like you've got all the information on hand. And don't forget, like, we do want them to live the rest of their lives joyfully, whether that's 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So find out what brings them joy, right? Maybe it's going to a concert every so often, whatever it is, right? It is very easy to get on the weeds and the stuff and suddenly get into action mode. And you also just want to enjoy their time and company. No playbook is perfect, right? But starting early helps. Experts definitely help and can help advise and guide the conversation if you're struggling to do so with your parents. And ask for help. Okay, I see Chinar. In addition to cognitive changes would be motor tasks. Yes, motor tasks are a sign of Parkinson's. Yeah, I have a good friend who has a parent with Parkinson's. And that can be really tough. Yeah, all of those hand holding, grasping, tying shoelaces, walking around. That is often also when people start to consider different living options and living situations, because moving around just becomes really, really challenging. Absolutely. I am going to put please feel free to come off mute and ask me questions live. As part of the Sidebar community, we always want to capture feedback. So please, if you don't mind scanning this QR code, and while I'm answering questions, just submitting any feedback on the talk, it helps me be a better presenter and provide more value to the community. And it helps Sidebar also make sure that we're hosting events that are most meaningful to Sidebar. And if you have any questions after this, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you can just add a note saying that you got to know me through this talk, I would appreciate it. Okay.
Hey, Elena.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Hi,
back.
Connor.
Hey,
Great.
one of the questions that I was thinking about was earlier part of your talk when you mentioned different places that they could age in, right? Aging in place
Yes.
or assisted living.
Yes.
Uh, Now, aging is very like these are chapters of our life, right? It's not constant that we have taken
100%.
place, okay, independent or assisted. Especially when you age, it gets harder to move from one place to another. Like initially, you would think they're doing fine, they will go to an independent living place, for instance.
Yep.
But then slowly, as they age, maybe 75, 80, 85, then you think, okay, they need more assisted living.
Yeah.
How did you navigate? I don't know if you navigated. If you navigated, what would be the recommendations around how do you manage those transitions? Because with age,
Yeah.
it gets harder. And
Yeah.
then making those arrangements, because we all know at some point everyone will need assistance.
100%.
Uh, but you cannot just go to an assisted living right away. So do you
Yep.
hold off to that stage and then directly go there,
Yeah.
or go to independent then assisted? And that's a lot of planning to transition for yourself and for your parents. So, if
100%.
you have navigated that situation, if you could talk a little bit about it.
Definitely. I did. I helped my parents transition to an apartment in an independent living facility at a senior living community that is called a CCRC, which basically means they have independent, assisted, and memory care. That's just a term used in the United States for continuing care, basically. So the idea is you could live until the end, basically, there. I did move them to independent living at one place. While there, I had a friend who had a father in assisted there who did not have a great experience. And so my grandiose plan of, oh, they'll just stay there, went south. And I dove back into researching assisted and memory care places and ended up putting them on a wait list at two other places for assisted and memory. And at the time that they came off that wait list was like just ended up being amazing timing for getting off because there's a whole nother thing about my mother, as I mentioned, had wounds. She ended up having one very large wound. It actually required surgical procedure. It was very involved. If you have a parent with a wound, a lot of places won't accept them because it's a liability and they're really hard to manage. So we worked very hard on just healing that wound in time for her to move. That was a whole nother thing. So I would say, yes, it is a lot of moves and it takes a lot of time and it is exhausting. There is no way my parents could have moved straight from the house to an assisted living situation, though. They were used to so much space, and I was very fortunate to find an independent living apartment that was relatively spacious. A lot of these independent living apartments aren't that big and they're not always that nice. So it's a jarring transition for most people, right?
It is.
And so for them, like I couldn't even, I'm going to just stop sharing for a sec. Um, I couldn't even imagine, taking them straight to that. That was going to just be way too hard. Uh, and so allowed them to gradually get there is the answer.
Okay.
If you can find one place that has everything you need into the future, amazing.
Yeah.
Way to do it. It
Yeah.
wasn't our situation.
It is a lot that I don't think places can actually do that because there's so much that goes in terms of regulations and the requirements from the state and insurances. So,
Right.
so one last thing,
Yeah.
was there any financial aspect to when you are putting them on wait list? Like, do you?
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, there's such a range of places out there. So you're going to have to figure out for each place, right?
Yeah.
A lot of places have an upfront fee. They call it kind of like a buy-in fee too.
Okay.
Some of which you might get back depending on how many years you stay there. Wait lists specifically require a deposit that in the cases where I put them on the wait list, if they don't end up going there, I always got that wait list deposit back.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, kind of like in business, the wait lists kind of they operate in interesting ways. If you really want them to get in somewhere, it helps to, keep a really good relationship with that head of salesperson place. Like email them constantly, say, hey, I think we're going to be ready in 2 months, or I think we're going to be in 1 month. What's the situation? Where am I on the wait list? They will keep you top of mind.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Got this thing.
You think it's just a wait list, but I don't think so.
Relationships go a long way.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah, of course. Anybody else?
Hi, Elena.
Yeah.
This is Eric. How you doing?
Good. Hi,
Hey,
Eric.
thank you again for having this presentation. I was actually invited by Kim there because she knows my situation with my parents
Oh,
and
good.
such.
Yeah.
So, I didn't grow up with like any siblings, so like I've kind of been the sole decision maker slash burden taker slash everything
Yeah.
for my parents. And my parents, my mom's side of the family, I did research. She does have a history in her family of dementia.
Yeah.
And I'm already starting to notice beginning symptoms of that at 78 years old. And
Yeah.
my dad, he's the one that like his attention span has just been shorter. Like I can't have a conversation with him without having him kind of follow up on that conversation about him changing gears and changing to a new topics about something he saw in the news or whatever. So,
Yeah.
um, the biggest thing I've been looking at, because I'm also, I'm half Filipino, half Puerto Rican, but with Spanish roots, is I've
Yeah.
been looking at other countries
Oh,
for
yeah.
parents to be at because I think the biggest thing for them I noticed with my dad is that community. Like he
Yeah.
loves coming to visit me in Orlando and talking to
Yeah.
all my friends, my neighbors, and such. He doesn't really have that so much where he lives now. And my mom used to be a very community person, but she's now holed herself in her room, just watching hours of TV all day
Oh,
and trying
no.
not really being that spouse that she should be, type of thing. Like she's already exuding symptoms of just kind of getting away from everybody, isolation, you
Yeah.
know. And her place, and I was thinking about when you were saying about like trying to get stuff cleaned up or
Yeah.
transitioning slowly, like helping clean up with the house or whatnot, so that way there's less stuff to have to deal with if a move is necessary.
Yeah.
But my mom also has never ever seen a doctor for as long as I can remember. I'm 45 years old, and I cannot tell you last time she went to see a doctor.
Yeah.
So knock on wood, I guess she says God's her doctor, so I guess he's doing a great job for her, in that sense. But
Yeah.
at the same time, too, getting her to probably go see a neurologist to determine that, it's gonna, I've talked to her about it, like, nope, just God would just take me. I'm like, Mom, chances are you're probably, gonna be healthy enough. That's not like that, like a snap.
Right.
And then
Right.
my dad too has kind of been like the unofficial caretaker for her, but even he's starting to notice the difference. So my thing is that I'm kind of looking at other countries like the Philippines where, you know, social security checks go a long way over there. And
Totally.
you can have help over there, maybe not like medical help like we have the quality here, but it
Yeah.
does go a long way over there. And the communities are a bit bigger,
Yes.
and Spain,
Yes.
I heard, is really good too, and I've been looking into that for citizenship for them. But I'm wanting to get them to travel before they can't travel anymore, to
Yeah.
get. So, because the cost I've seen over here in the States is just astronomical,
It's insane.
it's
It is
like,
insane.
y-
And
and then
your point on
go ahead.
community is also really important. I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought that up. You're welcome, Michael. Yeah, I didn't bring that up, but it's such a huge factor. And I will say, people want their independence, and yet the
Hmm.
great thing about some of these communities is they have activities, and the rooms aren't that big, but that's by design because they want you out of the rooms interacting with
Yeah.
people. And when people are older, that interaction is kind of what keeps them alive
Yeah.
and joyful. And, it's hard to meet new people as you get older. And oftentimes whenever I'm visiting them, I'm like, oh, let's go see Larry. Hey, Larry, tell us about yourself. Like I'm trying to facilitate the meet and greets. And they start to realize, like, oh, that person did have an interesting life. Oh, they did do some interesting things, right? I will say the activities aren't always so exactly up my parents' alley. My parents were huge readers, and arts and crafts isn't exactly what they want to do, or flower making or whatever. But um, it's still, as they're aging, they're kind of starting to do it just to interact with others. And that community, it really goes a long way. And they did not have that as much in independent.
Yeah, and that's difficult too. And I've even seen some homes nowadays, like Lennar homes, offering like where you can have pretty much just like a home within a home, almost like
Yeah,
having a mother-in-law suite. So they have that sort of independence still, but
yeah,
being right next door just by opening a door next door. So it's like an
absolutely.
apartment within a home. So,
Yeah. Well, and they
so I've
have
been
these
looking at this option.
ADUs that you can put in the yard too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
way they have to go walk outside to get some sunshine in order to make it to the,
Right.
to visit. So yeah, just been looking at the costs and everything. It just doesn't seem, it's like, oh my God, that's but I can only imagine when I get to that age that it'll just be even more. So I'm looking at now out of
Absolutely.
country possibilities for those things. So and that's what I was the one to mention about with TRICARE. So my dad was a serviceman, retired, and wanted to see, I guess, how much because that's like a secondary or supplementary insurance that I'm
Yeah.
still trying to get familiar with on that. So but yeah, no, thank you for the presentation. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy to. I'm glad it's of use. Anybody else have a question? Okay. Vinit, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I'm good. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. And if you have any follow-up questions or if I can be of help in any way, feel free to connect with me. Okay,
Thank you,
great.
Elena.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.